Life is unpredictable, but preparing for the unexpected shouldn't be. Take ownership of your life planning with Policy Genius to help your loved ones have a financial safety net in case something happens to you. They offer life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. Don't wait for life to make other plans. Protect your family today. Head to PolicyGenius.com. That's PolicyGenius.com.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic!
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us again on the Seafood Matters podcast. You can help me by pressing subscribe and share it with family and friends. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Tim Eagle, MSP, Member of the Scottish Parliament for the Highlands and Islands. Hi Tim, welcome to Seafood Matters.
Hi there, how are you doing, Jim?
Very well, thanks. Very well. Before we get going, for the benefit of our listeners, please walk us through your career and the path that brought you to the Scottish Parliament and the role you play there.
Well, it's quite an interesting question, actually, because I didn't ever foresee myself entering politics from a young age. From about as young as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a farmer, have worked quite hard towards that. Myself and my wife bought a small holding about 20 odd years ago now, and we've been building that up piece by piece throughout most of my career. And to supplement that, I worked as an agricultural consultant and as a land agent, working with many farmers in and around the northeast of Scotland and the Highlands and Islands. And then I'm very attached to the community of Buckie. I was very involved in the church there and in the football club there and various other things, the youth football club. And I got tapped on the shoulder by a guy called Douglas Ross, who some of your listeners will know, former leader of the Scottish Conservative Party and the MP for Murray, who said, would you consider standing in a by-election in Buckie? And I'd never even thought about it. I was on the community council at the time. And I said, well, fine. Okay, I'll stand. I had, I was centre ground, centre right, so I was conservative leaning. And I stood, lost that election, but then won in 2017. Very quickly became the leader of the key Murray Council Conservative group. Stood in 2021 and suddenly found myself in the Scottish Parliament when another regional member got elevated to the Lords. And so I've been there since February 2024. So it's been fantastic. It's such an opportunity. I'm very, very, very passionate about rural Scotland. I'm very passionate about primary industries as a farmer, which is how I met yourself, because, fishing, farming, oil and gas, all of that sort of stuff, I think is so important. But together with my 4 colleagues, 3 colleagues, myself makes the 4th, we cover the whole of the Highlands and Islands. So I sort of tend to do a bit of Murray, a bit of Western Isles, Argyll and Bute, and some of my other colleagues cover other areas.
It certainly seems an exciting time for you. And thinking about it as you say that, I think it's quite interesting, the fact that you're from farming background, but there's no, I take it, do you live in the Buckie area?
Yeah, so we've got a small farm just outside Buckie.
Well, with your farming background, and there's no getting away from fishing anywhere near Buckie. And I don't know what you feel, but I could almost say in my career it's the opposite. I've been from fishing my father was a fisherman, fishing family. I've been in the fishing industry all my life. And now we are living just on this. We bought the house we've got now, we bought it from a farmer when he moved into the bigger house. So I'm sitting on the edge of a farm now. So I've come the opposite from you. And do you see what fascinates me? There's so many similarities.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, effectively it's all food production, isn't it? But for me, these are all these sort of primary, these key industries, and I'm quite not unique. I don't want to point that out, but I think it's quite interesting, living in Bucky, because obviously the fishing community is incredible here. There's still that, it's just in the blood. It's absolutely an essential part, despite the fact that it's not that big in Bucky anymore. I mean, it used to be. The harbour was once full with boats, as I'm sure you'll be aware of. It's still very much in the spirit of the community is still very much fishing, and farming and fishing. I think whilst one's at sea and one's on land, they're both that food production. They're both that primary industry. They're both rooted in family and community, and I think that's why I found myself more and more in my MSP role getting very much more into. I was always passionate about farming. I always loved fishing. I can remember defending it during the Brexit negotiations in 2021 as I tried to stand in Murray. But certainly, since I've met more and more fishermen as an MSP across the Highlands Islands, I've found myself becoming more and more passionate about trying to deliver change for it.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Another thing I felt was good in the past, unfortunately, unless I'm wrong, I don't see it the same now. It was a celebration. We used to celebrate the harvest home at harvest times, and every fishing village that I know of would have a celebration. It would be, we called it a tatty and herring night. It was a new herring, just the start of the season, and every village hall in a fishing town had a tatty and herring night, and it was just celebrating.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when I grew up, we would have had that in church. Actually, you would have had the Harvest Festival, and then you would have had one of the Sundays in summer would have been the sort of Harvest Sunday, and you would have sort of thanked God for all the food that was produced and everything else. I don't know if you see that anymore. I've got 3 kids, and I don't think I've ever during their primary school or secondary school. Sort of had to be involved in any sort of harvest celebration, which is a shame actually, because maybe we live, it's a political question, isn't it? But maybe we live more and more in a day and age where people's relationship with food now is very different to understanding that, exactly where it comes from. And to some extent, COVID maybe reiterated that in people's minds. But I worry sometimes that we're losing that again, just realizing the value of our farmers and fishermen.
The other thing I'm sure you notice now I find fascinating talking to the farmer, believe it or not, he'll tell you anything you want to know about birds and the birds around the farms and in the hedges. And you go out with a fisherman and he'll tell you the same all about how they can watch them. It tells them about seasons, and that it's, to me, it's much, much deeper than just instruments telling them.
Well, I think this is this is really crucial, isn't it? Because I think I think we might come on to this, but this point about actually we need to be really careful how we are portraying these industries, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I've got farmers around me that I know very, very well, and they will look out for how many curlews or how many skylarks or how many buzzards or eagles or whatever it might be are on their land, and they want to see things. They don't want to see species hurt. They want to see things thriving. But yet there is this misconception that somehow anybody working in these industries, not amongst everybody, but there are some people in our society which are trying to paint these industries in this very negative light. And I think that's deeply concerning, because that doesn't mean, rather than all moving forward together in the direction we want to go, we're starting to alienate people. And that is never a good position to be in from my point of view. So you're absolutely right. I think there are fishermen and farmers out there that really passionately care about their land. They want it to be sustainable for their sons and daughters and their grandkids and so on and so on. And to suggest otherwise, I think, is wrong.
I know it might sound a wee bit controversial. I would say a fisherman or a farmer, I've learned more, and I'm sure they could talk more about nature, birds, and all that, than a so-called environmentalist who's supposed to be looking after the planet.
Yeah, I better watch by what I say politically, but yeah, I mean, I would definitely reiterate that point that, I have, we are not actually a particularly big farm, but, the land I have, and it's spread out and about. So I've got a piece down by Spey Bay, which is, very close to the Spey, which is a very important river for Murray. I've got some land down in Bucky. I've got some land up the hill. And I for years now, I don't think we've sprayed chemicals for a long, long time. We don't put fertilizer on that land. We use clover, and actually it matters to me now. I was in the field just before we cut for hay recently. I was in the field and it was full of butterflies and bees on the red clover and everything else. And that made me smile. I wanted to see that. I want to encourage wildlife, because ultimately that helps me. So you're right. I think there is a lot of knowledge amongst our key producers, like farmers and fishermen, that maybe we don't, as a wider society, really respect enough anymore. We kind of rely on the seepers and the nature scots and the everybody else, but actually not recognizing that some people do sustain generational knowledge of the sea and of the land.
Very much, very true. If we move on, what was your gut reaction when you knew about the Attenborough film calling for a blanket ban on bottom trawling?
I think it was a bit of like one of those oh no moments, that sort of slight frustration in, David Attenborough. I think I've watched every series he's ever produced. I'm a great fan of what he's done, of what he's trying to do. But saying that, the problem I had when I first watched this film, and having had quite a lot of contact with obviously the industry, and coming, I suppose, with my mindset of, those two hats of, well, three hats, that farmer hat, sort of member of society hat, and then a sort of political hat, was, oh dear, has this film missed something? And I think that was my problem, that whilst the film, there's some things in that film I can get behind, some of those elements, particularly around bottom trawling, were, this is very one-sided. It didn't include fishermen. It didn't include that other story about some of the great work that's going on. And I suppose more than anything else, my worry was that people would get up and see that, and that would just create division. And if there's anything that I've been trying to do in the background for both farming and fishing in the Scottish Parliament, and what I hope I will continue to drive forward on, is to actually heal any divide in our society, so that rather than have environmentalists attacking producers like farmers and fishermen, we are working together. And there are some groups that are brilliant at doing that. I mean, absolutely brilliant. Unfortunately, though, I'll admit it, there are some that are not. And I worry this film verged, if not went over, into only showing one side of the story.
Thank you. Are we seeing a campaign to ban something that's deeply misunderstood by the very people pushing the ban?
I think that goes back to my prior point, doesn't it? That my understanding, now I'm no expert, you'll have other people on your podcast that are far more of fishing experts than I am. I'm still sort of learning. But I've read case studies of great examples of where smaller boats dredging for fewer days at sea, very specific areas, shorter tow times, really targeting key species, where there has been good nature recovery, good biodiversity in areas despite that going on. And I guess that's the point, isn't it? That you can get groups and individuals calling for outright bans, and they make it this big thing, so we get the real politics, comes up, and everybody gets very emotional about it. But actually that's not helpful, because actually it then creates this massive divide, and then some people get really upset by that. Local economies can be very damaged by that. Businesses can suffer and go under because of that, and then we have people unemployed. So that is the very point, isn't it? That actually, if you have these massive campaigns without allowing that discussion and people to come together, then actually, I don't think you're ever going to push forward in the way that's the sustainable way that I think fishermen, farmers, and everybody else would want to see.
And fishermen, put it simply, it's interesting coming to what you think of this one being a farmer. Would a film about farming without a farmer be taken serious? So is this acceptable in the film without about fishing?
Well, I such a good point. I mean, I think that's actually a really good way of putting it, because if you had done or somebody had done a film about spring barley production. That's a massive thing in the north, right? So huge amounts of spring barley production for malting that goes into our whiskey industry, which then creates huge amounts of money for the Scottish economy. But if you had done a film very much focused on that from an environmentalist perspective, without looking at, so you could focus, couldn't you, just on that? You could have a field, a 50-acre field, of which 45 acres is the spring barley, and all you do is have camera shots of that sort of center part of the field. What you don't see is all the hedging around it. What you don't see is the woodland that's been planted. What you don't see is the wetlands that have been created. What you don't see is all of the agri-environmental stuff that's going on around that. And what you might not see by looking at that field is the fact that it's maybe had very little fertilizer. Maybe it's not been sprayed. But unless you are hearing the farmer's perspective on that, you aren't understanding the full message of what's maybe gone in. And so you're absolutely right. To have a film about historical fishing activity, without getting the voice of the people involved in that, I think was a mistake.
Do you feel it's people talking down to fishermen?
I don't know. I keep reiterating the same point. I just go back to that point that politics is done best, in my view. Others may disagree with me, but in my view, politics is always done best where we come together rather than apart. And as I say, there are organisations I've met during my time in the Scottish Parliament that I have so much respect for. There are some environmental groups. Some of your listeners might not be keen on me saying that, but there are some that I think genuinely are working with the industry, and they're not attacking, but they're coming together and saying, how do we work together to make sure that local economies thrive, that local businesses thrive, that family businesses thrive, but we also can make sure that we're looking after our environment. But there are others that I just don't think are doing that. So I think the problem, not picking on any individual, and I'm certainly not wanting to pick on the likes of David Attenborough, because he obviously voiced this, but, there were lots of people involved in the background. But it's just making sure that fishermen are part of the process and part of the discussion, and that when films come out like this, they're not abandoned. They don't, because from what the feedback I have had is that fishermen feel very much excluded and attacked by this, rather than welcomed into the discussion moving forward.
Do you think the public has been misled by emotional storytelling, or is it dressed up as science?
I mean, I guess one of the big political questions at the moment, I'm, I don't know how political I'm allowed to get, but so my party, I represent the Scottish Conservative Party, but we're fighting, to some extent, reform at the moment, who are a big, there's been a big surge in support for them across Scotland, and there's no one denying that. So I guess it's about, but I guess part of that is about people starting to question now what net zero means, what the climate change means, what, because we've seen significant rise in the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. So, to some extent, I think the public now, there is a wider public feeling now that is starting to question in a whole new way some of the sort of political rhetoric of the last 10 to 15 years. Now, I'm probably not I'm no expert that can really comment on the fullness of that, but I think there is a realization happening now that I haven't seen before, certainly during my time in politics, and what's that been, 10 years or something now, of the public waking up to the fact that actually some of the messages they've been hearing maybe don't take into account the full facts and the full discussion. And certainly, I mean, I know it's land-based, but the single biggest issue in my inbox at the moment is energy infrastructure in the Highlands and Highlands. Now, normally that would be something like health, but actually I get more emails every single day on pylons and wind turbines and battery storage than I do about anything else. And that's because Highland communities are just facing this constant pressure, this constant barrage of a changing landscape around them, and feeling that they are completely excluded from that discussion, that every comment they have is being completely ignored by the Scottish government. And I think that's the same of what you're saying here, isn't it? Is that the public are potentially being told one thing, but not getting the full information.
I know up Caithness, where I live, people they get a circular coming in about a proposed wind turbines going up, and they'll want to object, but they just know now there's a little point because they're not going to be listened to. And the other thing people feel now, and I have to say it, I'm quite happy to put my own name on it, or I find totally bizarre, or why have we got turbines now on our loveliest beauty spots ashore and our best fishing grounds at sea?
Well, I believe me, I have raised this. Spatial squeeze now out at sea is such a big issue because fishermen are just. I mean, where do they go now? Like, I mean, it's really, really difficult. And I know the Scottish Fishing Federation have really tried to push this but this is the problem. Like, the northeast is the north of Scotland. Sorry, is on sea and on land is facing just the biggest change that's happened in such a long time. And it's frustrating because, you politically for me, you look at things like the A9, the A96, major upgrades to roads that we've been crying out for years and pretty much ignored on. The A83 in Argyll and Bute has been single track for 4 years. It's not right. And yet, when suddenly people, the political pressure says, oh, but we can use the Highlands and Islands for our renewable energy future, and we'll just shove everything there, we'll welcome all these applications, and then the communities turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, can we have, we live here, this is part of who we are, all these businesses, these tourism businesses that rely on the scenic beauty of the Highlands and Islands. And when Americans and Germans and all of these others come over and they think of Scotland, you often think of that sort of Glen Affric, don't you? Those beautiful West Coast spots. And actually, suddenly it's being like completely industrialized. And I'm perfectly happy to admit that because I can show people through my inbox there is a lot of very, very deep concern. And I think that will be shown in the election next year as well.
Good. If I have to put my name to it, and my political leanings are very much on your side.
Well, I think we're the again, I don't want to get too political, but I think we're the only party in the Scottish Parliament at the moment that are actively trying to give a more recognition to communities and trying to make sure that communities have a much bigger right in the planning application process in whether these projects should go ahead or not. And I personally would have supported zonal. I know we're going off the topic of fishing a bit, but I personally would have supported zonal pricing. But going back to that fishing point, I think the point is here and this is a bigger rural issue, isn't it? That whether we are talking about energy infrastructure, whether we are talking about farming, whether we're talking about fishing, or in this specific case, dredging. It has to include the very people that know what they're talking about, that live and breathe this every day. Because if it doesn't, then all you do is alienate people, and all of that does is cause controversy and division in our society, and that can never be a good place to lead from.
Well, I like what you say about communities and that, because I would say the whole of Scotland's very much like that. And I know that it's maybe just not, it's been going to go for longer probably than what's happening now, but when regionalisation and the Highland Regional Council, and that was the end of Caithness County Council and Sutherland County Council, it's been an unmitigated disaster up here.
That so I'm not completely up to speed with that, but I know there was a call. I seem to remember, was it a couple of years ago, there was a discussion as to whether there should be some changes again in the, because Highlands, I mean, I obviously I live in the Murray Council area, so I mean Murray in itself is quite big actually, but you know it's in terms of its two neighbours, Highlands and Aberdeenshire, it's quite small because they're very big. But you're right, if you think about the Highland Council, I mean the area that is covering is ginormous. I mean it's massive, and actually there is an argument that actually there are some very distinct communities within that, and actually my understanding is that Highland Council works through area committees, but I suppose there is an argument, and I think that's shared by some councillors, that actually separating that up would be more beneficial. But I'm not an expert on that, but I could see why there might be arguments for that amongst Highland communities.
Well, it's certainly had an effect here. There's a common feeling here, although this might definitely sound controversial. It's no far from the truth. The only place you'll get a road in our area now that is not full of potholes is if there's a Highland Council official or a councillor at the end of that road.
Yeah. As an ex-councillor, I mean, I should say, like, I guess, yeah, you're probably right. I guess one of the things I think it's really worth mentioning, and I know it's really difficult for people, you know, because no council is perfect. I think that's fair to say, you know, like, you know, councils are made up of thousands of individual staff, and there are always going to be amazing staff doing amazing things. And unfortunately, there are going to be times when things go wrong. But the only defense that I've always said about councils, and I've always been very honest about, is that for the last 15 years, councils have faced the biggest financial, for want of a better word, attack than they have ever faced before. I mean, the budget that councils have got has been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. It's like pulping an orange 50 times over and still thinking you can get another drop out of it. There is nothing left. But in the same period of time, the expectations on councils, particularly around health and social care, adult health and social care, children's health and social care, around the early learning and childcare expansion, which is a great thing, but it was very costly. The requirements around education have gone through the roof. So whilst there's been this huge cost increase in some of our core services, which are vitally important, there has also been this massive squeeze on funding. And that has meant that councillors and councils are in a very difficult position. And just to finish that thought, when I was a councillor, I had the fortune of having a few councillors around me that had been councillors for 20 years. And they used to, or more actually, and they used to recount to me stories of once upon a time councillor being a wonderful job, because you could come in and there was lots of money and you could do loads of things in your community. But these days, actually, there just isn't the ability to do that. So whilst I would never suggest that all councils are perfect, councils have faced a very, very difficult decade, if not longer, and continue to face it.
Yeah, where I am, it mightn't be possible now, but what's talked about in our area is the Caithness County Council, for example. There would have been half a dozen people running it. Every one of them were local people. So if there was a local inquiry or somebody wanting help with something, they knew the people, they knew the area, they knew everything that was going on. Now it's seen as the Highland Council, as far as employment's concerned, is the biggest growth area in the world, because whereas there would be half a dozen people running each council, there's now hundreds of in Inverness, and nothing gets done.
I mean, let me be very clear on this. I think, Jim, what this is probably this is a fantastic question, and again, we're diverting. Although some of your listeners might enjoy listening to this, but there are two things that politically here I think are massively important. One, I am completely against centralization. I think it is an unmitigated disaster. I don't, centralization comes from this thought of if we centralize everything, then it's cheaper. It's nonsense. I was actually a police officer in Wick for quite a short period of time, sadly, of which I won't bore you with the story. But my wife was posted to Dr. Gray's Hospital as a doctor, and one of us had to kind of give up our career, so I came back to Murray. But I was a police officer in Wick for a couple of years, and we had a wonderful lady that used to work the desk, and who would take all the calls when they came in, both 999 and the non-emergency numbers. And because she was local, she knew everybody in Wick. So anything that came in almost could be dealt with like on the phone, like, oh, hi, John, hi, Seth. Like you just knew every single person. And that community policing was so, because you could deal with things almost in an instant. And the moment it came in, they knew who they were talking about. They knew where the problem probably was, and you could target it very, very quickly. I felt it was so effective and efficient. And then kind of this centralization agenda came in, and everything's pulled into, and you lose that community, you lose that locality. So I think that's just, I personally, if I ever found myself in government, I would probably be trying to push that actually we put more of this back out to these areas. And I guess the other thing is, I think you're absolutely, when we do that, I think you probably need less people, because they're more, if you've got people working and living in their communities, they're more involved in them, and they're more wanting to see that success. Whereas the expansion of the state over the last 18 years of the current government is just ginormous. And whilst I want to see lots of people in work, the fact is we all have to pay taxes to support that. And if we are, and we want to make sure that every single civil servant we have is there and doing the right thing for Scotland, rather than a ballooning state with huge amounts of managers taking huge amounts of salaries, which comes at a huge cost, when actually we should be focusing on other things. So I'm with you on that, and I'm happy to state my political views on that.
Well, if you've been here, you'd be shocked to see it now, Tim. There's two, sometimes, only sometimes, not permanent, two policemen in Thurso, two, sometimes three in Wick, and that's Caithness is a lot.
I mean, I haven't actually been back to Wick for a good few years. I must come back up the road, actually. Do you go into Wick very much yourself?
All the time, yeah, between Wick and Thurso. I just like supporting local. But if I want to buy something, I want to get it local. I don't want to be going online.
Yeah, I mean, there is some great examples, I think, of. I was up in Forres the other day. I don't know if you know Forres very well. Thriving high street. Great to see lots of local shops. And I mean, business. I mean, we could go on to a lot, Joe. We could talk for hours about this, but businesses, local business and supporting local business, I think is really important. And one of the other projects I've been quite heavily involved in fact, I've got a big meeting next week on it. Is the visitor levy, and actually just the implications of that for local businesses across the Highlands and Islands. But I want. The high level message here is, I promised myself when I spoke to my wife, when I was asked by Douglas Ross, I got a phone call from Douglas Ross a couple of years ago telling me that I got this opportunity to come in as an MSP. And I remember having a coffee with my wife afterwards, or maybe it was something stronger, Jim, I'm not sure. But having this coffee and talking about, should we do this? Because actually it is, because I'm away all week. So I'm away, from a Monday night right the way through, often till a Friday morning. And actually I've got, my children aren't that old, they're sort of early secondary school, late primary. So actually being away is actually, from a family perspective, my wife's a doctor in Bucky, does a lot of work. So, but actually one of the things I sort of said is, if I am going to do this, then I am going to fight the corner of rural Scotland all the way, and I will put every effort into I can. And I think locality, supporting local businesses and supporting rural communities and all the activity they do is absolutely essential for me.
Well, I have to say, listening to you, Tim, and I've felt it before in many of our other conversations, I love your enthusiasm, and actually I feel it's quite infectious.
Well, I'm glad. I like to think I'm a cup half full person rather than a cup half empty. It may be too enthusiastic at times, but I like rural Scotland has given me everything in my life. I could never see myself moving away from rural Scotland. So all I guess the reality for me is, Jim. I've never been one to deny. I've never been one in politics to sort of, and you can ask anybody this in Murray Council. Like, I've always accepted that the truth is what it is. Sometimes I think, often politicians are sort of called out for lying or not telling the whole truth. Often I think the truth is far more powerful than a lie, to be honest. And actually, so it's worth just talking about the truth. But the reality for me is I might only have 2 years in this job. I came in February 24. I might not have a job from May next year. I'm standing in Murray, but there's no guarantee I'm going to get back in. So I guess all you can do while you've got these opportunities is fight your corner and fight. And my corner is very much to fight for rural Scotland. I've held 2 debates on that already, and I'm going to hold more in the Scottish Parliament before I leave. Hopefully, I'll get another 5 years to do it. But yeah, let's get infectious together in the right way, and really sort of drive forward fishing and farming and everybody that lives across rural Scotland.
I'm happy to come on board on that. But let's, even what we're talking about here with the environmental situation, when you're saying there about truth and that, would you agree a lie is halfway around the world before the truth gets his boots on?
Well, the one thing I really struggle with, I think if they're honest, every politician from all parties really struggle with now is social media. Social media social media could be a tool for so much good. It's a way of connecting people. It's a way of bringing communities together. It's a way of combating isolation. It's a way of showing just what's happening in areas. But the sad truth is that all too often social media is used as a tool for negative, and so much misinformation is being spread on social media that it goes back to my point about division again. Like, it causes division, and it's just not helpful. And I guess in the past, even when I was young, I mean, I'm 45 now. I don't know if I can say I'm getting older or not yet, but even when I was young, when you didn't have that, like, all of your news really came through the media, and the media was kind of non-biased. So the media was always presenting the right or some sort of balance to a story. Whereas the worry now, of course, is you don't get that balance, because you see an article, everybody comments, and then if everybody's commenting or thinks the same thing, everyone believes that's true. So you're right. It's so quick, isn't it, for a lie to get around the world, or for misinformation to be spread and actually not understand. And my message to my own children on that is constantly, and the message I keep telling myself is, in everything you hear, in everything you do, stop, take a second, and try and think about what the other arguments around that will be, what the other thoughts might be on that. Because, to be honest, what is it they say? There's 3 sides to every story. And I think anything I ever read online, I always think there are another 2 sides to this that I'm not yet hearing. And I think that's important.
I couldn't agree with you more on that one. And one I maybe feel that you probably don't want to say too much on, but I think the glaring example, of that is the BBC. I was just talking to somebody recently. I can remember when both my father and my father-in-law were still alive, going back. If there was anything real major, war broke out or anything like that big around the world, the absolute go-to for everybody to get the real true answer, the BBC. And now I just don't think anybody can trust what the BBC, and I think it's a real shame. And the other thing I feel, it's quite interesting, you go to a newspaper for a newspaper, or you're in a supermarket at the newsstand, and you see all the different papers, and it could be the Guardian, the Express, go through all the national news, the Times, and that, and the same story, the headlines are completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, in the job that I do now, I know quite a lot of journalists, and I think print media has faced a very, very difficult, I don't know, decade or two. I'm not an expert on it, but I still think, like, when I meet reporters in the Scottish Parliament and locally, I've got some fantastic local reporters that I know. they are really dedicated to putting out the right story. But I guess the problem is that everyone's fighting for their space now. I don't know if that's fair, and I would happy to be challenged on it if I'm talking nonsense. But my understanding is that papers are just fighting to survive on an online world, against people that put any message they want on Facebook, whatever that looks like. But you're right. In an ideal world, you can never go back, can you? In an ideal world, for me, we would somehow, I don't know, somehow make social media safe, certainly safer for young people and for everybody, to be honest, but particularly for young people. But I'm being cautious here because I believe in freedom of speech quite strongly. So I would never want to curtail freedom of speech, but I definitely. My view, and I'm not saying it's my party view, but it's my personal view, is that what we definitely need to do is make sure that information is as accurate as it possibly can be. Otherwise, we can't have a true conversation. And I suspect a lot of reporters out there would love to see papers going back to being neutral, non-bias, and telling us a story. But in the day and age they're fighting, it's very difficult to do. But sometimes I cry back for those days when even the BBC, you could truly pick up, and because BBC News is my main go-to thing. Every morning I wake up and the first thing I do is look on BBC News at what the headlines are, and I still have confidence in it. But do I have the confidence I would have had 20 years ago? In truth, probably not.
Yep. Going back on the Oceans film, is it really a conservation film, or is it, what would you say, eco-propaganda? What are the risks of celebrity-led campaigning in complex areas like fisheries?
So I think, is it a conservation film? I don't think it's. I don't know what I say. I think the some of the fishing groups I think would sort of come out and say it's eco propaganda. Obviously, the environmental groups would say that it's conservation. I don't know where I sit. I have always been happy to what I want is a sustainable future for both land and sea. There's no doubt about that. But what I also recognise is that UK food production is vitally important. So I want sustainable fish stocks, and I want to have lots of communities all around our coastline being able to fish those sustainable fish stocks. And I want land to be sustainable so that we can continue to grow our wheat and barley and carrots and potatoes and cows and sheep and everything else that we do. But I go back to the point. The fundamental problem I had with Ocean when I watched it, and I've watched it a couple of times now, I watched it again the other day prior to coming onto this, is that it did for me, if I'm being honest, only show one side of the story, and that lends itself then to saying that it is more a propaganda than it is genuinely trying to put forward, to push forward the wider discussion between all groups about the future of sustainable fishing in our country.
Yeah. Do films like this have any duty to reflect the science, or is good lighting and compelling voiceover enough to sway public opinion?
I guess in this day and age, the people like David Attenborough have very, very powerful voices. But quite rightly, I mean, he's done a huge amount for this country, and for nature and the environment. You can't deny that. So is the King, I think, done a lot, and Prince William, I think, is doing a lot as well. But I guess the point is, if you've got to be careful. TV is a big thing, isn't it? So any film you are producing or any documentary you are producing, which touches on these quite difficult areas, in my view, should be balanced. So you've got to make sure that they are bringing they're bringing all of the agencies, all the partners in, to make sure that that the public can get that wider viewpoint and understand that wider message of, well, why did this happen in the first place? What are we doing now? What is happening in local areas? What are fishermen doing? Because if you only put one part of it and then you say outright ban, then actually I think you're missing that opportunity to bring people together.
Yeah. So David, is he telling a dangerously incomplete story? And when you've got the voice of God on a global platform, can telling half a story end up doing more harm?
Well, I guess that's what we've just been saying, isn't it? That the risk is, and I think this has happened because I've seen some of the comments that have come back from fishing groups, is that they felt completely alienated by this film. So I think the potential issue here is that films that don't have that balance are harmful in the sense that they actually create that division that I've mentioned many times now. So David isn't the villain in any way, shape, or form. I mean, all he's trying to do is put forward a message, and maybe and I'm not against the conversation. I should say that I'm not against any conversation about sustainable fishing moving forwards, but that's got to include everybody in it, and that's got to recognise what many, often small family businesses, have already been doing, and there are some case studies to show that, to try and make sure that that the flora of our seas are coming back to life and are fished sustainably.
Would you say you see it as tunnel vision? The film hammers bottom trawling, but skates past aggregate dredging, seabed mining, offshore wind farms, and industrial cabling, which we've already mentioned, all of which impact the seabed. But why the silence?
That's a good question, isn't it? I guess I'm not an expert on all of those things, but I guess you're right. There is a reality that sometimes we focus on one thing but ignore another, and actually, interestingly, if I go back to what some of my communities are saying, the constituents across the Highlands and Islands, back on that energy infrastructure point, this wider question of, and it's a question for me, and again, I'm absolutely no expert in this, completely open to being challenged on it, but when you are installing 15 wind turbines on a peatland and you are digging up huge areas of that peatland and installing concrete, what are the impacts of that on the water? What are the impacts of that on the area? What are the impacts of all the hardcore tracks? So I guess it's very easy to say, but this is needed because of X, therefore it's perfectly fine and we won't question it. But this, which has been going for years, well, we feel we can attack that and question it all the time. I guess there is a risk. You're right. I guess there is a risk that we focus in on things just because we feel we can and attack them and actually sow that division, rather than looking more broadly and saying in everything we do, we should be making sure that this is meeting the sort of the politics and the policies of the time.
I was disappointed to recently interview somebody from one of the NGOs and asked him that very point, and he agreed, but came and said, but they are very much for banning bottom trawling and MPAs, but they have no planned campaigns for aggregate dredging.
So, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on that, but I know the HPMAs, the highly protected marine areas, are actually just before my time in the Scottish Parliament. But I remember following that quite closely in the news when I was on the farm, and just recognizing that that fell apart, and it fell apart because actually there just wasn't enough discussion, there wasn't enough of bringing people together, and it wasn't required because actually there was already a lot of really good work going on, and sometimes all I think the industry is calling for is just to be a part of these discussions, to not feel that it's constantly under. It's the same as farming. I mean, I know farming much better than I do fishing, but it's the same with farming. Like, farmers pull their hair out sometimes. They're like, gosh, all we're trying to do is provide food for our country, and we have done everything that has been asked of us, from I don't know if you've got farming listeners, but people might remember countryside premium schemes, environmental stewardship schemes. There's been loads of versions of agri-environment schemes over the years, and farmers for the last 30 years have constantly gone into these. They've constantly done what they felt the politicians were asking them, and yet they still feel they're being attacked. So I guess it's that point again, isn't it? Just bring people on the journey with you. Don't put out stuff that just attacks without and then create that division without allowing people to come on that journey.
You refer to HPMA as, is that the one that was beaten by a song?
Well, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
In fishing ports around the UK, Attenborough is no national treasure. For many, he's just the latest campaigner taking shots at an already struggling industry. I think this film felt like a torpedo below the waterline.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've made a few comments on the film now, and all I can do is reiterate the same point. If I'm honest, like I I'm in no ways wanting to attack David Attenborough. I don't think he is the villain here. All I am saying is that from my political perspective, it's if you truly want the right outcome, if you truly want, because I guess there is that wider political point, isn't there, that as a politician, I've always felt this as a politician, actually, ever since when I went into the council, I had to learn this very, very quickly. I don't have the luxury of looking at any individual activity. So I'm not just about education. I have to consider education, health and social care, environmental services, social justice, health and leisure, and roads and transport and everything else all as one. And when we've got that one budget, you have to consider how you spread that around, but there are lots of individuals that will only look at one part of that. And so I can never become an expert. I'm kind of one of these, I was always a bit like that on the farm, a bit of a jack of all trades, actually. I can help fix your clutch on your tractor, or I'll do the brakes on a car, and I'll do a bit of fencing, and I'll do a bit of everything. But I guess the point for me is, ultimately, we've got to bring people together. And if we don't do that, then you're never going to reach the outcomes that we all want to see. So it's absolutely right that everybody, I believe in democracy, everybody should have the right to have their little say, but but policymakers and politicians need to be trying to encourage those to come together in order to find the right way forward. And more often than not now, I don't think we are doing that. I think we are potentially. This is quite a political message, and I'm probably going to be questioned on it, but I worry now that we are more driving towards ideology than we are practical solutions that will actually take our economy and our country forward.
Great way of putting it, thanks. Do you think people have an idea really how tightly regulated UK fishing is today?
Well, I didn't until I got more involved in it over the last year and a half. So I would suspect, if I'm honest, I would suspect that the majority of the general public don't have a clue just how regulated some of our primary industries are, whether that be fishing or farming.
Do you feel farming is regulated as closely?
Well, it is. Every year you have Quality Meat Scotland farm assurance inspections. We are open to inspections from the Department for Agriculture at any point. We have to submit censuses every year. We have to submit nitrogen management plans every year. Chemicals are monitored. We have to write down pretty much everything we do. If you're in an EEC scheme, you keep farm management diaries of every activity you do. We cut in wildlife-friendly manners. Like there is a huge amount of paperwork that goes on in the background, which I think probably the majority, rightly, because I wouldn't expect necessarily them to know, but I suspect people don't quite understand just the paperwork requirements that go on behind some of these industries.
Why do the media seem obsessed with problems in fishing while progress barely gets a mention?
That's a really good question, isn't it? Because there has been a lot done. There's been some really good campaigns actually from the likes of the Scottish Fishing Federation, just looking at what fishermen are already doing, what technological improvements are coming through, how changes in nets are making a difference. Fishing communities themselves, going out for less time or fishing at certain times of day to catch particular species or whatever else it might be. So I guess it goes back to a point earlier on, isn't it? And again, I'm no expert on it, but what makes the news is the thing, isn't it? Are we living more and more in a day and age where what the news is got to be this either very emotional or very challenging or something that stands out, rather than actually all of that just good stuff that goes along in the background that nobody's really interested in, but actually is making quite a bit of difference.
Would you not add with the different, what you said there about the news, bad news?
Well, I guess, yeah. That's been said ever since I was a child. Why is the news always full of bad news rather than good news? Because maybe we live in a society where we all want to hear about bad news and not good news. Although, to be honest, sometimes I crave just putting on the 6 o'clock news and it being full of really positive, wonderful stories about happy things. And sometimes it is. But sadly, more often than not, it's filled with where things go wrong rather than where all the amazing things in our country every single day across our communities in both urban and rural settings, which are going very right. And I had the first time in my life actually. I had the opportunity to go to the garden party in Hollywood this year, and I wasn't very keen on going. I'm not somebody who dresses up very well, but my wife was very keen, so we went down. But we were talking to some people there, and it's incredible. It's a really important message, actually, I should say, in everything. There is amazing work that goes on. And when you meet some of the people behind some of the charities across our country, some of the people doing, Scotland in Bloom, some of the people running tourist industries, some of the people keeping Scotland beautiful and all of that, it is incredible. All the good stuff that is going on. Sometimes when you read Facebook, I spend 10 minutes on Facebook and I'm like, what's our society coming to? But there is a lot of really, really, really good stuff going on in our country.
Yeah, there are still a lot of good people. Attenborough has a global platform. The fishing sector doesn't even have a voice in the room. Do you think it's a fair fight?
Again, I don't want to pick on Attenborough because I don't think that's. I guess for me, I'm not sure how helpful that is. But I guess what I am trying to do here is, and I reiterate the point, is that I just think the fishing, it's fair. It's not fair enough because I don't think this film is helpful because it went to a global audience. But I think what the policymakers and the politicians, and certainly I'm just an opposition politician, but certainly what I want to make sure is that fishermen do have a fair voice in that room. And I know that I've welcomed some of Fishing Forward, which I know you are aware of, into Parliament already. I've met with the Shetland Fishing Federation. I've met with the Scottish Fishing Federation and many others, Open Seas, and lots of different groups across Scotland. And I will continue to do that. And I will, from my personal perspective, and all I can do is I will make sure that in my thinking and in the policy I am bringing forward for the Scottish Conservatives, that fishermen absolutely have a voice in that discussion.
Well, encouraging. What about smarter alternatives? A seasonal closure, selective gear, properly enforced MPAs. Would you think that would be more effective than a blanket ban?
Well, I'm not the expert on what is right and wrong in each regional context, but one of the wider discussions we're having is actually about those sort of regional groups and whether we need to have a better sort of regional management of seas so that we can ensure that diversity of local people are coming together, because I'm acutely conscious that what works for me in a Murray setting for farming will be very different to what might work for a similar sized farmer in Dumfries or Galloway or something like that. So I think for me, there probably are smarter alternatives. And actually, rather than necessarily having this one viewpoint, that actually it might be much better to have regional alternatives which are created by and managed by regional groups who know what they're talking about in that local area. And actually, that's something that we actually had a discussion on that on the Rural Affairs Committee in the Scottish Parliament. It's probably quite a few months ago now. But actually, that we were questioning Marine Scotland, or the Marine Directorate, I always forget what they're called now, about their approach and actually whether we need to change the regional fisheries groups to maybe a different model.
Very good. What's your views on this that have been asked by a listener? Isn't this a classic case of unintended consequence? You ban bottom trawling in the UK and we won't stop eating trawl-caught fish. We'll just import it from countries with weaker environmental and labour standards, looser regulation and higher emissions. At best, it's naive, and at worst, it's downright disingenuous. We hike the carbon footprint offshore the damage, and still call it progress. Who exactly are we trying to fool?
That's a good question. Let me take another example. So one thing, I am really hot on food security. I still go back to that historical message of off the back of World War II. We recognise that food security in our country is incredibly important. One of the reasons the Common Agricultural Policy came in the first place was to support food production. Now I know that's farming, but I want to take that forward because food security in this country, fishing, farming is vital. full stop. So do I think is energy production. I am all in favor of an energy mix rather than focusing on one particular thing. But just on that, one of the clearest examples that I think most people would understand on that, which is why my party are calling for far more support for oil and gas, is it's fair enough if you want to say as a country we want to move towards a sustainable energy future, but I think an energy mix is the way forward. What we are doing to oil and gas in this country at the moment, I think, is an absolute disgrace, because we've got thousands of people employed in very good jobs with huge amounts of skills in the North Sea. We have attacked these industries time and time and time again. Aberdeen is now going down, but we're not stopping using oil. So we're closing our own fields, and then we're buying from often the same field. It's just that Norway are pumping it out. They're taking it on a boat to Norway, bringing it round either by pipe or by boat or whatever, and then bringing it back into the UK. So we're still using the oil. Now, my argument has always been, as we transition to whatever the future looks like, we should continue to use the resources, the skills, and the economic prospects from in our own country, rather than relying on that coming in from other sources. And I guess that's exactly what you're saying here in that question, isn't it? Is that, it's very easy, isn't it, to ban something in this country and say, oh, don't we all feel good that we've banned that? Aren't we so much better? But the truth being that all we've actually done is offshored it. All we've actually done is bringing that product in, whatever it is, by a different route, but from a country that actually we have no control over, and we've got no idea, not necessarily was ever meeting the environmental standards or the welfare standards of what we currently have in this country now. So I get that point, and I think there is some truth to that point.
Great answer. I like the comparison. What would a ban on trawling actually mean for coastal communities and local livelihoods?
Well, I think these communities are often already on a knife edge, and I think it's actually quite. I can get almost a bit emotional about this, because, as I said earlier on, I'm very passionate about delivering for rural Scotland. Rural Scotland represents about 98% of the land area of Scotland, albeit it's only about 17% of the population. But I've always argued that just you don't want everybody living in your urban areas, because actually it's really important that we have communities that are looking after our sort of natural heritage. But you're absolutely right. Maybe it's not just specifically about a ban on trawling, but the consistent attack, or what is perceived as a consistent attack, and in some ways is a consistent attack on our industries like fishing, is very damaging, because actually it puts particularly our young. We're already facing a mass, and we have now for a long time, a mass exodus of young people from our rural communities. If young people are growing up in a world where they see their mums and dads being attacked for creating or producing food or catching food or whatever it is, then actually what incentive do they have to go into these industries? How can we ever hope to encourage our young people to take up these much needed roles in our society if actually all they see is people being attacked for just doing a job and helping to feed a nation? So yes, I think communities are very vulnerable unless that message is right, and unless making sure communities are part of the discussion.
Thank you, Tim. Up our way, we're over 20% depopulation every year.
Well, that's and I my first debate in the Scottish Parliament. So we do. I don't know if you know how the Scottish Parliament works, but there's things called members' debates, and members can put forward a topic, often after the chamber business in a day. And as long as you get some cross-party support, and parties try and help each other to make sure that these things are debated, you can have a debate. And my first ever debate that I led was on rural depopulation. It is fundamentally for me the central. Whether we think about Caithness maternity or the hospital in Wick, or whether we think about Dr. Gray's in Murray or Skye, healthcare, social care, education, getting professionals, getting teachers, getting doctors, all of this is only possible if we make sure we have a thriving economy, lots of different activities on offer for young families. So because rural areas need these professional staff. But if we consistently ignore the thoughts and feelings of our rural communities, then all we are doing, in my view, is risking a further and bigger exodus of our young people. And then there won't be those young families, and then there won't be those professional staff or any staff that are there to work.
That's a good point you make there, Tim, because unfortunately, when we talk about the depopulation, it's the wrong people we lose. Younger people and people that are keen to work and maybe open businesses, and that's the people we lose.
Yeah, and they're the people in any community. You need a mix of people. You need your retirees that are often quite very good at volunteering in local activities. You need your working families. You need your young people. You need, a community doesn't thrive on one subset of people. A community thrives on having that broad diversity, and what we are seeing in many areas in the north of Scotland at the moment is an exodus of young people who are saying there's nothing left for me here, and actually often maybe going away for university and then not returning. And that's not true of all. There are many young people that are staying, but if you look at the statistics, it's clearly showing that there is a significant problem with rural depopulation.
Thank you. Just transition. This is possibly the buzzword, but what does it really mean to you, and how should it apply in this debate over banning trawling?
I have no idea, Jim, what just transition means anymore. I'm honestly starting to think now that it's just a buzzword. It's just as you say, it's just one of these words that people throw out to make the move towards net zero look good. I think, if I'm being honest now, in my own head, I've started to just ignore it now because it literally, I think it's lost all meaning. Because actually, a just transition for me has to factor in all. It's all the same point I've already said, but it has to factor in all those various different points, and it has to bring all people together and respect their view. If you can't have a just transition, it's if you go out to consultation and then pretty much ignore everything it says and do what you wanted to do in the first place. So I think, and in terms of the debate over bottom trawling, I just reiterate that main point, that actually the only way you're going to have sustainable fishing moving forwards and sustainable rural economies moving forward is if you actually ensure that your local communities and those people active in it are part of that discussion and feel included and listened to in any policy moving forward.
Yeah. The bigger NGOs spend a lot of time lobbying in Westminster. Do you see any of this in the Scottish Parliament, Tim?
Yeah, I mean various groups come into the Scottish Parliament. So during my working week down in the Scottish Parliament, every afternoon the chamber is on. So I try where I can to get into the chamber to listen to whatever debate is going on. There's often committees on in the morning. So I sit on the Rural Affairs Committee, although I've been in the Net Zero Committee a lot recently because of land reform. But most of my time, other than that, is spent in meetings with lobby organisations, whether that be the major businesses, whether that be ENGOs or whoever else. There is a lot of contact. I suppose I should put that into context. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're coming in very much delivering a very powerful message and telling you must do something, because I have probably had as many meetings with the Scottish Fishing Federation or and other groups, or Clyde Fishing or whatever it would be, as I have probably had with ENGOs. But most organisations do spend and do come to the Scottish Parliament and get individual meetings with MSPs to discuss what their policy areas are and what they're thinking.
Do you feel there's any genuine common ground between the fishing sector and the NGOs? And how do we make use of it instead of lobbying grenades?
Yeah, there is, Jim, and I do want to be positive on that. Like, don't get me wrong, there are some areas where I think the wrong message is being sent, and there are some that are stronger than others. But in the middle, there genuinely is some organisations that have worked it out, that although they might not necessarily agree completely, they have worked out that it's only by coming together that we can take this industry and all industries forward. So there is some genuine common ground, I think, appearing that I think is really positive for this discussion.
Good. Public pressure shapes policy more than ever. How do we make sure science stays in the centre of the conversation and not swept aside by slogans and sound bites?
Well, I think I've already worked with you, haven't you? Like one of the arguments we put forward actually is that actually the Marine Directorate needs to have a much bigger investment back in science again. I actually think we need to maybe think about, it's quite political, but I almost think we actually need to think about starting again with the Marine Directorate, re-establishing a whole new body. But science must be at the very centre. And do you know what? I have yet to meet a fishing group or an individual fisherman that has disagreed with the point that actually they want the very best science. Pretty much in fact, everybody I've met has said absolutely 100% on board with the best possible science. And because if I can trust that science, but that's what I want. I don't. But what they are more often worried about is political rhetoric, and actually what they want to see is the raw science. And that's why, in truth, we should be investing in that far, far more.
Very true. Can we realistically feed a growing global population without bottom trawling?
I couldn't answer that in the sense that, again, I don't proclaim to be an expert on fishing. I don't think I'm an expert on farming, to be honest. But I don't think I'm an expert on much. But a jack of all trades, Jim. I'm all jack of all trades. But I think this goes back to the right regional approach, and that approach will differ. You got to remember, Scotland isn't a small country. We have a huge coastal area, and the approach that we will need to take in each of those areas, there will be some areas that are very sensitive and that do need some form of protection. There'll be some areas where actually it's perfectly right for fishing, and actually various different methods of doing that will be perfectly safe and actually done in the right way is very sustainable. I guess it goes back to that. We mentioned spatial squeeze earlier on, didn't we? And I guess that's part of the problem is that actually you need to have a really good sort of marine spatial plan, don't you, to understand exactly, and that should be almost regionally worked out so that actually everybody in those local areas know how best to serve the area. So I couldn't specifically say, in terms of bottom trawling, but I think there is a method by which the UK can continue to have that food security that it needs in a potentially volatile world without, but also having good biodiversity.
From the way you look at it being localized and local people and that, do you not feel we would finish up with industries? When you talk about it, just comes to my mind when you talk about jack of all trades, and I feel we had it before. If you want something about fishing, if you want to know about seafood, ask your fisherman, ask your fishmonger, ask your fish merchant. On farming, ask your farmer, ask your butcher. Trust the people, the experts that know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that and to be honest, you see that at I went, go to any farmer's market and speak to the people producing this stuff, and they'll you don't even need to ask them. You will see in them the passion that they bring to what they do and the care that they bring to what they do. And I was at I had a great tour of Peterhead Fish Market actually with Russell Finley, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. It was before Christmas. Was it before Christmas? I can't remember actually, but it was around then, and it was fantastic. And just even speaking to some of the merchants there and some of the sellers there, and the passion and enthusiasm they brought. And then you go and speak to the likes of the Scottish Seafood Association and Jimmy Buchan and that, and again, just passion, just a real love of the industry and what they do. And I reiterate the point, I genuinely do not believe that any one of these people that I have ever met, and I've met quite a lot of individual fishermen now, as well as the groups, have any desire to see fish stocks destroyed or any desire to see the marine environment destroyed. They all want to see a sustainable fisheries moving forward for generations to come. All they ask is that, one, they are part of that, two, that political rhetoric doesn't overpower the science, and that actually the science is what is used to drive policy, rather than potentially ill thought out propaganda that might be spread online and in other places at times.
Couldn't agree with you more, Tim, and I'm sure you'll probably see the likeness in farming. But I feel strongly about this when you think, going on the point you made there, I don't know. I have spent my life in fishing. I'm in 70s now. I've never met the fisherman who went out to sea to catch the last of any species.
Yeah. You're right, and we don't want to see that. And I've got very good friends. I know some of my friends in Bucky, a lifetime in the industry as well, and they've now got sons and daughters coming through into the industry as well, and all they want to see. So completely agree with you. I just haven't seen it. I've just never seen anybody that wants to see the industry destroyed. They want to see it, and they're happy to talk about the way forward, but they want to talk about that in the right way, not in a negative way where they are portrayed as being these sort of evil people, when actually all they're trying to do is a job that has historically been a core part of our coastal communities for years.
Exactly, and they've made so many commitments. Why would they not want it to be sustainable and a future? Because they've made a massive investment themselves. They've got their family coming behind them. So what's not sustainable and looking to the future much more so than that?
I will completely agree. Absolutely, and actually, in any industry, and often not talked about as much as we probably should talk about it. In any industry, there is the industry themselves that are trying to drive things forward. And so I've probably got more examples in farming, because obviously that's what I'm connected to more. But certainly in farming, there are organisations that are coming through that are creating better cattle feed, or better machinery, or tractors that use less fuel. And even in fishing, like I had a meeting. I've totally forgotten the name just off the top of my head. We had a meeting recently about ways of changing or adding things to the engines of boats to make them far more fuel efficient and everything else. So the industry themselves often recognise the journey that we want to go on for efficiencies for the environment, and are pushing that way. So I think if we're being fair, then we need to recognize all of these things. And again, I go back to that point. That's why everyone should be included, because fishermen themselves want to see a sustainable future. They want to see a future for their future generations, and they are already working and spending their own money on upgrades to their boats and changes to their nets and everything else. And many of them want to dearly work with the government to ensure the right policies are in place.
I'm interviewing a guy next week, Tim, who's got technology that will turn waste plastic into biofuel.
Oh wow! Okay, but that's what you need. That's the sort of innovation that we want to see, and we want to allow these sort of innovative bodies to thrive, don't we? That actually we can come up with more and better ways to use our waste to drive forward our food production.
Definitely. Here's a challenge. If you had 5 minutes face to face with Sir David, what would you say to him?
I don't actually know. I probably would say, well, thank you for all the work you have done. I think some of the programs in the past that David have done are incredible. I remember the original programs about the seas and the oceans were just an earth, and that were just mind blowing. The way he opened up nature to many of us that would never have the opportunity necessarily in life to see these things, I think is amazing. And I think it's right that we should talk more about our natural world and the life in our seas and our oceans and on our lands. All I suppose I would say is that point about sometimes I often think that people almost forget that humans are a part of the world, as well. We are here, we and yes, I'm not saying we are perfect, we're not, but actually humanity comes into that. So actually, how do we create a future where humans and animals and marine life can all work together and yet feed a growing population and everything else? And that's why, again, the same point. It's why it's essential in politics that actually there is a genuine desire. We often do. I mean, there's thousands of consultations. It feels like there's thousands of consultations every week that come out of the Scottish Parliament or the Scottish Government. But actually, it's more than just about a consultation on a web page. It's about genuine engagement, genuine desire to meet the industry where they are at, genuinely hear what they are saying and take that back. And at no point, and everybody being free within that discussion to voice concerns and to critically question how we can all bring forward the best together. So I imagine I would have some sort of conversation around him with that, and then he would probably amuse me with wonderful stories of his life, and I would But I mean, it would be incredible to meet him, actually. I mean, he is a national treasure. We probably use that word too often now, but he has done a lot of good. And maybe there is a counter argument here. Maybe there will be some good that comes from this film Ocean. Maybe the good that might come from that is that actually the voice that has been slightly hurt by that film will come forward and will come out and will be heard. And actually maybe that will, fingers crossed, promote that better dialogue that I think we need.
I totally agree with that, Tim. And without having a go at Sir David, what I would say, what would come out with the dialogue would prove that, yes, Sir David has done a lot of good, but he's not got a monopoly on it. There's lots of people have good things to say about our environment and all that.
Yeah, agree.
One word to describe the future of British fisheries.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now, aren't you? Hope. Hope is a great word. I don't know, because I think of it often in that biblical perspective, because I am a Christian, and I often think about that during my working day. But I think having hope is vital, because we can become really pessimistic, can't we? And we can think that everything is a conspiracy. And I meet that a lot in my job. I meet a lot of people that are just convinced that there is some great conspiracy going on, and often I don't think there is. I think it's just individuals trying their best, and often that doesn't always go right, and we should all be open, have our eyes open to that. But I think there is hope. I think there is hope for the future of fishing. I think we've faced we've had discussions on this, haven't we? The new EU deal, I think, is deeply concerning. I think there are some worries about the new talks around marine protected areas. But in all of that, there is hope. And for me, there is always hope that we can have these debates. And I'm still waiting. I've been pushing and pushing and pushing for a new fishing debate in the Scottish Parliament. We managed to hold a debate on the UK deal, fishing deal, but that was very specifically around that. What I want to have in the Scottish Parliament is a much wider debate on the Scottish policy areas, the areas that are devolved to Scotland, and sort of bring up a lot of this. But I think if there's any message to the listeners that will listen to this, have hope in your industry, because there are people inside the Scottish Parliament who are fighting for you all the way, and genuinely want you to be a part of the policies and that future.
You find it delightful. It's reminded me of my dear old mother, who was a great Christian, did a lot in our church. One of her favourite quotes was, "Hope springs eternal."
Hope springs eternal. That's a great quote. Great quote. But it does, I don't want to get too Christian, but I've never been afraid to talk about Christianity. For me, Jesus is that great deliverer, because actually in Jesus, that when you have that faith, that bubbling faith inside of you, and actually you put your life in Jesus's hands, and you sort of push open the doors and you allow God to sort of deliver through. I think that does that hope. It fills you, doesn't it? I mean, maybe you don't agree, but for me, that faith fills me with that joy to go out, and that ability to want to listen and take back. And don't get me wrong, I don't get everything right. There are decisions I've made that I in hindsight, I think, oh no, that was actually the wrong decision. And I like to think that I'm honest enough with myself that I can come out and say that. And sometimes I don't do a good speech, and sometimes I do. But you're right, hope springs eternal. Like ultimately, hope is such an important part. Like if we lose hope, then we lose everything. Like you've got to maintain hope, because that's what drives it, particularly for my own life. That's what drives us forward.
Definitely. I think it's a great answer. Where can our listeners follow you and keep up with what you're doing, Tim?
Well, you can see, if you go to the Scottish Parliament website, you'll be able to find out what the last things I've been involved in are, and what, everything I say or do in the Scottish Parliament is recorded on there. But more personally, you can follow me on Facebook, Tim Eagle MSP, or you can go to the Murray Conservative website, and there's some information on me on that page as well. And I guess on that, I am contactable anytime, often still sitting at my computer in the early hours of the morning. But if there are any questions any of your listeners have on fishing, then get in touch. And even if it's a regional issue outside of the Highlands and Islands, I can put you in touch with another MSP who can help. But if it's a more broader question on policy or anything else, I'm always happy to help. And that's tim.eagle.msp@parliament.scot.
Well, I have followed you, and I think it's commendable what you've done already for Scottish fishing.
But I just wish I could have been more. It's been a wee bit quiet this last couple of months. We had a really big push when I first came in. It's gone a little bit quieter at the moment, and of course we're on recess at the moment. So obviously a lot of us are out engaging in our local areas as much as we can. And I'll be meeting some fishermen later on in the recess. But once we get back, we'll get back into pushing for this debate. I think there'll be a lot of build up to the Cabinet Secretary has promised a debate in the Scottish Parliament on fishing. I've got a lot of notes already that I will take forward I'll open this, well, I won't open, it'll be a government debate, but I will speak second in that debate. So I will make sure I've got my speech ready to deliver on that, and we'll have people on the benches behind me to talk about fishing as well. So, and I think that debate, I hope, will lead on to a few roundtables and meetings in the background. So as we were just talked about hope, there are discussions to come forward, and I look forward to continuing to meet the likes of yourself, Fishing Forward, Scottish Fishing Federation, and many others. And if there are groups out there that would like to meet, just get in touch, and I will drive wherever I need to come and meet you.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Tim. I think it's a good point to finish up, and just like to thank you so much. I've enjoyed that.
Well, Jim, it's been absolutely wonderful, and I really appreciate you having me on. And I hope all your listeners are well and have a lovely weekend to come.
Thank you. And as I've already said, your enthusiasm is infectious. I love it.
That's good. That's great. Thank you very much.